Welcome to the SourceForge Podcast, and thank you for joining us today. I'm your host, Sydney Shepard, here at SourceForge and Slashdot Media. And as always, the SourceForge Podcast is where we discuss software and technology with leaders and changemakers in the tech world. In joining us today, we have Shahzar Azoulay, the co-founder and CEO of groundcover. groundcover is an application monitoring solution built for modern production environments. It enables teams to instantly monitor everything they build and run in the cloud without compromising on cost, granularity, or scale. So thanks for joining me today, Shahar. We are very excited to have you here today.
Thank you for having me, Sydney. It's great to be here.
Cool. To start off, I'd love to just jump in and hear a quick overview of groundcover and what you guys offer there.
So basically, groundcover, as you mentioned, is an observability solution built for cloud-native environments. We basically offer a modern alternative to solutions that are used today to monitor logs, metrics, traces, basically using technology called ePBF, which I'm sure we'll talk about a bit later, and also a very unique approach to how we store the data to basically allow people to allow teams to operate with their logs, metrics, and traces at high scale in environments like Kubernetes without worrying about the way they collect this data or how they store it or how much they pay for it, which is a lot of the trade-offs and pains that are currently in the industry where teams kind of have to battle these two. So that's kind of what groundcover is about in a sentence.
Perfect. That's a great overview. So now I'm curious too about like the origins of groundcover. So could you tell us a little bit about the story behind, groundcover's creation and the journey that you guys had so far?
Yeah, so groundcover is kind of the cliche of us being the users of these solutions before. Both me and Chaz, which is our co-founder and CTO, we've been coming from a long background of engineering and engineering management in like very different places. I've spent a lot of time in the cybersecurity domain, in startups, and other places, and also a significant part of my career in machine learning and AI and things like that, both in startups and also in places like Apple. So I've kind of used these solutions, the different vendors, the open source solutions of this domain, and same for Chaz. So we kind of felt these problems firsthand. Picking these technologies for our team, onboarding our team into these technologies, making sure that we get the most out of them. And that's kind of why we set into this journey, combined with the fact that a lot of years in cybersecurity kind of, brought us closer to using a technology like ePBF, which is very deep tech, to try and solve the problem. And that's kind of, our main draw to trying to solve these problematic issues with technology or with advanced technology. And groundcover is basically revolutionizing a lot of areas with the technology that we use. And we had a lot of years to kind of learn that and figure out what we need to do before setting ourselves to build a solution we always wanted. So that's kind of where we're at.
That's awesome. That's a cool journey. I like that you're able to be like in a position where you could actually see firsthand where improvements could come in, and then actually able to create a whole company and successful company from that. And that's cool too, that you have the experience from like big companies, like you said, Apple, and then also small startups. Gives you, I'm sure, all sorts of good perspective for actually, creating your own brand. That's awesome. And then diving a little deeper into like the technical aspects, could you explain the significance of being able to monitor application logs, metrics, traces, and Kubernetes events all in one place?
Yeah, so it's not like this market is like young or invented by groundcover, right? It's a very substantiated market, and there is no company there that doesn't have some observability solution, right? It's the bread and butter of R&D teams. They use either one solution or 5 solutions, but they use something, right, to monitor their environment. And therefore it's not like groundcover is saving them from a worrisome abyss of not knowing anything. But there's tons of challenges of just working with so much information to monitor your environment. Basically, moving from monoliths where just getting logs from your main application was maybe enough to kind of get by, right? Suddenly, you're pushing into more and more hybrid situations where you're running on a pretty complex infrastructure. Kubernetes is like amazing, scalable, modern, kind of fits all type of solution. But basically, it's a very dynamic, configurable, ever-changing infrastructure. And suddenly there's a lot of connection between infrastructure and application. If before you just ran a Java application on a bare metal server, right, and you didn't care too much about what's going on, certainly not about optimizing the connection between the two. Right now, you're living in an environment where the actual servers you're running on are scaling up and down. There's different types of machines, a lot of applications running alongside your application, kind of interchanging your resources all the time. And therefore, just monitoring logs and metrics and traces isn't enough anymore. And connecting the whole, picture is what matters the most to troubleshoot stuff and get to the bottom of things really quickly. eBPF is one of these technologies that basically allows you to cut through, the entire stack really easily, from the infrastructure of Kubernetes that might, give you a lot of information, all the way to the application running on top. So basically, that's what we try to do. It will mostly cut infrastructure and application troubleshooting time dramatically, just by pulling all this data into one place.
Yeah, totally. I think anytime you can simplify things into one spot, that's definitely extremely helpful. Our jobs, I think it takes enough time to do a lot of things that we need to get done. And so anything that can help with that efficiency is great. So you obviously spoke a little bit about the ePBF. And can you explain a little more what that is and why groundcover chose to leverage that at the core of its sensor?
Yeah, so eBPF is a very old technology in a surprising way, right? Like every good technology, it's been kind of cooking for a while in the oven before kind of getting ready. So it isn't something that was just born a month ago. It has been developing for almost two decades as part of the baking itself into the Linux kernel. So it's an open source project pushed by the Linux kernel community, and it started off from simple things like helping you basically program the behavior of the Linux kernel around networking and more kind of bare metal stuff like that. And over time, it became actually like a sandbox or a virtual machine inside the actual Linux kernel, the operating system itself, that allows you to basically run more intelligent programs, basically, that can offer behaviors that you want to make the kernel do for you as a programmer. It's very safe. It's built to basically use kernel resources, which give you the power to basically observe anything, right? From an observability perspective, just the kernel itself, serves the user space where the application runs. So traffic like traces passes through the kernel. You can observe it. You can, start suddenly see who's communicating to who without actually being part of the code. So for us, basically, it means from a technological perspective, the onboarding is very easy. You run as part of the kernel, so suddenly you have the superpowers to see what all the containers are doing on top without actually, going to the developer's desk and making him put an SDK inside his code, which is always very hard. And from an organizational perspective, which might be even more important, suddenly one stakeholder inside the organization that is responsible for infrastructure can onboard into groundcover. Before, you had to go through these multiple stakeholders. So eBPF also cuts a lot of the cycles inside an organization when onboarding into an observability solution, which, besides the technology itself, is also very important because it's hard for a big company to, convince a lot of people in a lot of stakeholders to move in a direction. So that's kind of why it's interesting for us.
Yeah, totally. That is super interesting. And you kind of touch on that, I think, in this last answer, but how would you say that, ePBF affects the deployment of ground cover as opposed to like a non-ePBF solution?
Basically, it's more tied into the infrastructure natively, as we mentioned. So if you're running a Kubernetes environment and you have a bunch of Linux VMs basically running that Kubernetes architecture behind the scenes, then eBPF is going to run as a sensor inside those actual machines. So it first have access to the infrastructure, right, to see whatever is going on in the machine itself, but also on the containers on top. So it makes it kind of a one tier for all from a deployment perspective. There's no need anymore to have exporters for metrics, log collectors for log, SDK for traces. basically it's kind of a technology that flattened these tiers into one, because you're in a central place like the Linux kernel to basically pull all that data in together without having to work hard with different technology stacks. So it also simplifies the deployment, but also the product tiers maybe, right? Because in a sense, these tiers were built because of the different technologies, like on top of the other. There is no necessary logic about separating infrastructure monitoring from log management, for example, just by the fact that they're collected differently. So eBPF also helps that kind of maybe post deployment, like the second after the deployment, to also flatten these tiers into one joint experience. So that's a very cool part of this technology.
Yeah, that's awesome. That sounds great. And now that we understand, how ePBF impacts deployment, can we talk a little bit about, the benefits for users? So what unique insights does groundcover's ePBF sensor make available instantly to its users?
So one of the most important things is how granular and intimate this technology can get with with the data it observes, because basically there's a lot of data you can already collect when applications expose metrics or emit logs and things like that. But eBPF can go really deep, for example, into like intricate network metrics that basically dissect the behavior of an application from a networking perspective, and also tie that like a second later to the actual payload of a trace being transmitted between that application and another one. So it provides two very powerful feedbacks for users. One is kind of the wider scope or wider coverage without doing anything. In a sense, it takes the human out of the equation, right? If I have an instrument in my code, I can see it. If I have an instrument in my code, I can't see it. And in some cases, it means that even when I'm observing a pretty well instrumented system, I have no way of knowing that there's a dark hole there that I just forgot to instrument, or is a legacy application that I never intended to instrument. And eBPF is kind of agnostic to that, right? Regardless if it's your code or not, you get the coverage from it. And then, a lot of intimate and very detailed data from this collection in a uniform way. So you get a uniform observability very, very deep into your applications without thinking about it or doing too much about it. And in most cases, it can be the difference between just not having, for example, traces and suddenly having, a uniform observability around traces. So it's an enabler for many cases, just because it's so hard to get, equal in the way you observe all the different microservices and systems running in your production.
Those insights sound pretty powerful to me. So I guess it seems like there's only upsides to ePBF based off of everything you're explaining. So why isn't everyone adopting it then, would you say?
I'd say it's a technology on the rise. First of all, right? There's a lot of hype around it, but basically, the technology itself in the Linux kernel has been kind of maturing into the state that it can do things like replace a full-grown APM with an observability eBPF sensor just in the past 3 or 4 years. So that's pretty new, and the number of applications built on top of eBPF is still very young. So even if we're looking at the observability domain, which is kind of the frontier for eBPF, most of the legacy vendors don't have any offerings yet for eBPF. So we're still kind of ahead of that curve a bit, as a company. And I think that over time, regardless of where groundcover is going to be, we're total believers of the technology itself, and we're going to see that as a sensor in more and more applications, from observability to security to networking. It's just like maybe the few years where eBPF is kind of shining, and probably in 2 or 3 years it's going to be clearer. That's the most reason why people aren't adopting it. It's just not on their desk yet for available to them in like multiple vendors selling it to them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Got to get the word out there a little bit more to everybody.
True.
Yeah. So shifting gears a little bit, can you explain groundcover's in-cloud architecture?
Yeah. So besides being an eBPF company, one of the things that we always knew from the get-go is that eBPF is just going to provide more data, right? And companies have tons of logs, tons of metrics, tons of traces, and now you just introduced another frictionless technology to collect tons of data about their applications, and it's just going to make the data state kind of things even worse, right? They have to store this data, they have to query this data, they have to basically pay for this data, right? For any vendor that they're using, which charges per volume. So we knew that even though groundcover was kind of early there, that once Datadog and New Relic and basically these big giants of this domain will offer eBPF, they will offer it for a premium, right? You're going to have to pay what you paid so far plus, a premium for eBPF data. And that's why we went from the get-go from an architecture which we call in-cloud. Basically, it separates the data plane and the control plane. And the data is being managed and stored inside the environment of the user, inside their actual cloud premises. We manage it for them like a SaaS experience, and the entire experience feels like SaaS. But basically, the infrastructure of the logs, metrics, and traces groundcover stores is stored on their end. And therefore, we're moving suddenly from charging them per volume of data to being on their side and just saying, you pay for the infrastructure. Let's make it as cost effective as possible and completely break the pricing model as you used to experiencing that. And that therefore groundcover basically can, besides being cheaper, can basically take off a lot of trade-offs that companies have about what data do I ship to my observability vendor? Should I monitor that or not? Basically just, liberating them from this decision, allowing them to monitor whatever they want while paying a reasonable price for that for, the infrastructure that stores this data. So that's basically what in-cloud is about.
Yeah, totally. I mean, cost reduction is always appealing in businesses, and everyone's looking for that. So that sounds awesome. In addition to that, how does groundcover address the needs of organizations that require the highest level of data security and privacy as well?
So in cloud by nature, since once it's up and running, it's kind of built for privacy and security in that sense, because basically groundcover doesn't have access suddenly as an observability vendor to the logs, metrics, and traces it collects at the company that it actually monitors. So in cloud is stored on your cloud premises under your security policies. Data has been stored at the region it's collected. So it's very privacy and security aware. We're not sub-processing your data. We're not storing or accessing your data as a vendor. And basically, it allows us to be very privacy aware from just the architecture itself. The second step to that is that once groundcover already runs the in-cloud part of it, then supporting full on-prem, in case the company is interested in that, it becomes super easy. It's just running the UI itself. The only piece that isn't running in the customer's environment, and therefore groundcover also support full on-prem and air-gapped environments as well, which most of the vendors in the market kind of don't support today. It's kind of an underserved market, turning mostly to open source and so on and stuff like that. So in-cloud allows us to support a lot of flavors of privacy aware companies and support their needs. And the friction we get from customers about being more and more privacy aware is just growing over time, and each vendor in the market is going to feel it like over the past few years.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I mean, security and privacy are definitely critical for most people. So in addition to that, I'd love to hear how all this translates to like a real world impact. So what feedback have you received from clients about groundcover's impact on their operations?
Most of the things we're seeing is that once groundcover is installed, two things happen. One is that eBPF suddenly discovers something they haven't seen before, and it happens like in 99% of the times we install the sensor. There's something about this kind of empowering feeling of like tons of data just flowing in without having to work for it. That suddenly things pop up and bubble up where companies just haven't seen it before. That's one. And the other thing is that you see suddenly companies just shipping more observability data that they've been holding back on just because they didn't want to pay for or couldn't afford the risk of it costing too much. And then suddenly things clear up, troubleshooting becomes easier, problems, pop up that they haven't seen before. So in most cases, we just see these things happen like, days after the installation, which is really fun to watch.
Nice. That's awesome. That's cool too, that you can get the feedback so quickly, like right after implementation. That's awesome. And looking towards the future, how does groundcover plan to stay ahead of emerging trends in the cloud native observability?
So in a sense, I think groundcover is one of the interesting things about groundcover besides the ePBF and, in cloud and all the stuff that you talked about is that this solution was kind of born in, the cloud native domain, right? We were born in this era, and therefore there's a lot of things that legacy vendors just can't adapt to that quickly because this world is changing really quickly. So we basically know what users are looking for. We know how they want to observe their data. We know what technologies they're using, and we're better fit to this stack. And therefore, we always look forward to, for example, how Kubernetes will evolve and where should we be from a monitoring perspective, what should we offer our users, alongside a lot of ways to intelligently query their data. A lot of part of what groundcover is about is supporting scale. And I think that's the hardest problem in observability today. People have just too much data. It's really hard to query. So supporting high scalable ways to query data, intelligent ways to kind of sift through tons of data, that's mostly where we focus on right now to make sure we can, basically take on this new world of endless growth in cloud resources from any company that we see. So,
yeah, that's awesome. And getting a little more specific, if you're able to, is there any new features or developments on the horizon that you're excited about and are able to share with us?
Yeah, so groundcover is working on a lot of different aspects. One of the most exciting things we're about to do soon is support the run of our sensors in multiple environments outside of Kubernetes. So we're always going to be, Kubernetes first and Cloud native first, but basically we're moving to running it on other types of infrastructure to allow people to get the data from eBPF wherever there's a Linux machine they want to cover. And we're also supporting a lot of great use cases around querying logs at high scale, allowing people to define alerts and queries on their data easily from the groundcover UI when they have like multiple environments, a lot of clusters, and a lot of information. So there's a lot of advancements there that we'll be pushing out in the next few weeks. So everyone playing with groundcover or following us know it's coming.
That's awesome. That's super exciting. In the next few weeks too. That's very soon. I love it. This next question is just kind of random and a fun question, but I'm curious if you had any story with how you guys got your name, Groundcover, or if it means anything, or if it was just a fun random name.
Yeah, so it's actually an analogy that we had in mind when we kind of built the company, because groundcover is a type of if you've seen our brand, we use kind of plants, here and there, and flowers and stuff like that. So basically, the idea behind it is the ground cover represents a type of plant family, which is basically kind of growing between the cracks of pavements and stuff like that. And it's kind of an analogy of basically covering those cracks in production where bugs might appear, and giving you that full coverage and that peace of mind. Also, with correlating with nature, which always feels calm and peaceful for DevOps that don't want to wake at night. So that's kind of where the name came from.
Awesome. I love that. I'm always so curious to know, if names have a meaning or not. And that's a very good one. I love it. And for people who are interested in learning more and, seeing when those new updates that you have coming are released, how can they stay up to date and get in touch with your team?
So we have a few cool ways to kind of keep up with what we're doing. One of them is we have a live demo we call a playground inside the actual groundcover website. So if you go to play.groundcover.com, you can actually play with the platform and see everything released just as it goes out of the oven. We have a community Slack where you can see our announcements and follow up on our newsletters and updates all the time, and ask questions as well. If you're trying out the platform and it's free tier, which we also offer, then feel free to just chime in and ask a question. And basically anything that we put out there will be released through these channels. So it's the best way to keep in touch with what we're doing.
Awesome. That's cool. I like that you guys have the Slack channel that people can go on. I think that's fun when people have that. And last thing, do you have any last thoughts or things that you would like to share with the listeners about Groundcover?
I think just to say that observability is a critical part of what they're doing in their day-to-day life, and there is no easy way to solve all the problems. But I think eBPF is a technology worth trying and kind of seeing for yourself what it can do. I think that it really is a type of technology where seeing is believing, and since it's so easy to try out because it's frictionless and super easy to install, then if it's not Groundcover, it might be another solution. But totally try it out and see if it can help your stack. Can help your troubleshooting be a bit more efficient and more sophisticated in like the infrastructure you work with. So that will be my kind of final thought to leave people with.
Amazing. Good piece of advice. Awesome. Thank you, Shahar, so much for joining us today. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in to the SourceForge podcast. Make sure to subscribe and stay up to date with all of our upcoming B2B podcasts that we have coming for you. Catch you guys in the next episode.